Hello and welcome everybody. Welcome back to Comedian MTG. My name is Ian. Today we are talking about an event called the Fishbowl. Now this is an event put on by a store in San Diego called TC's Rockets, and it's officially co-sponsored by Playing with Power. Now the reason we are talking about this event today is because it actually got a pretty good attendance, and it's one of the larger in-person non-major tournament scene events that has been put on as of recent history. It's 76 players, which, as I mentioned, for like what is in a sense a local tournament, a really good turnout. So really happy to hear about this tournament. It's sponsored mostly by Alex from Playing with Power, who did a lot of the organization for this. And without any further ado, we're going to break this down. Now, this video, I just got this information really late, and it's going to be a bit of a quick job as far as like breaking these decks down very quickly and turning it around really quick in the editing process. But I didn't want to leave you guys without a video this week, and I really wanted to hype up this tournament because Playing with Power and Alex put on a great tournament, and I really wanted to talk about this. And there's a bunch of really cool decks here. So without any further ado, let's break down this top 16 and this top 4. First list we're seeing here today is Urico. I only play it for the art Doomsday. It's Urico mid-range classic Urico list. Some people call these Urico stacks because of the fact that they play, like Grafdigger's Curse Totem and Null Rod in these lists, but it's to me more of a mid-range deck, and it's definitely more of a synergy deck, right? We have the classic things with Urico here with our evasive creatures allowing your ninjas to get in, and then Kamigawa gave us a ridiculous amount of cards for this deck, the Prosperous Thief and the Nashi and the Moon Circuit Hacker and the Thousand Face Shadow, and then before that and Silver Master and Modern Masters 1 gave us a couple ninjas in the fact that we have like Ingenious Infiltrator and a couple others. So this deck has been getting more supplements over time, and it's just basically this mid-range deck that's trying to get in, hit a bunch of triggers off of Urico, flipping over things with a high converted mana cost, things like Shadow Mortality over at 15, Enter the Infinite at 12, Temporal Trespass at 11, Seagate at 7. What I really like about this version, we have Dig Through Time Commandeer at 8 here, 2 and 7 respectively, is that this version, even though it is playing things that have a very high mana cost, Shadow Mortality feels like really the only high mana cost card that doesn't also actually provide you value, right? You're not seeing things like your Blink Moth infusions at 14 here. All of your instants actually interact with the board state. Shadow Mortality at the very least is a 7/7 creature. We have Temporal Trespass being an extra turn effect, and for Enter the Infinite. If you ever get to the 12 mana, which doesn't seem like the most likely thing in the entire world, but if you ever get to that 12 mana, it is straight up just resolve this spell, win the game 99% of the time. And that's a really good benefit of playing this version of the deck. This version also playing a lot of really cool free spells, which I know are pretty popular in Urico, but playing things like Contagion and Sickening Shoal, which you don't see a lot of Sickening Shoal nowadays, but a lot of really cool cards here. And obviously Urico fills your hand a ton, especially if you get your engine online. So having a card like Shoals and all these cards that are pitch cards, which you have to pitch another card for them to be free, you get so much card advantage, especially when you get more ninjas on the battlefield. So it's very easy for Urico to get a bunch of advantaged mana here. For those who don't know, it wins either by cracking a Doomsday pile with a large converted mana cost, dealing like 40 something damage to your opponents, or it can win with classic Thassa's Oracle Demonic Consultation lines. We're going to talk about Rocco here. The joke, Rocco, cEDH with proxies, I don't know. I think this is just a note from the player. But this is a Rocco food chain and combo list. It's playing the Vivian combo with your Rocco. What's really interesting about this Rocco is that it's playing Vivian, but it's playing Academy Rector and not Arena Rector, which I find very strange, because if you're already going for the sacrifice outlets to get Academy Rector, it's very weird that you wouldn't have Arena Rector, which just wins the game with your commander. It makes me wonder if maybe there's accidentally a typo here, but obviously Academy Rector also gets you your food chain, which is something you need to win the game, but definitely very surprised not to see an Arena Rector in this list. It's also on Birthing Pod. The main win cons in this deck being the ability to go your Kiki Jiki combos with Felidar, Guardian Kiki, and Karmic Guide when you go up your pod lines. This one's definitely playing some interesting stuff here with new Elesh Norn, which I've been told by a lot of Rocco pilots that Elesh Norn is a huge benefit to playing this deck. Now, this version is not playing some of the specific Elish Norn focused lines, but it's playing your classic Kiki enablers like Village Bellringer, while also playing your Dockside combos as your pieces for your food chain. Dockside being able to go infinite with Emil and Tiber Sabertooth in this list. I'm very interested to see Terror of the Peaks here. I'm assuming it's for some sort of either instant speed wins or just wins that can avoid the combat step when you can go off in the second main phase. Ashaya is really interesting as like anti-cyclonic rift tech, which also like does a lot to like double your mana up, because obviously Rocco, when you're trying to get 5 or 6 drops or 4 drops from your deck, definitely needs a little bit of extra mana, right? Because that's an 8 mana cost for Rocco to cast it. So Ashaya definitely helps with, once again, mana production, and it is protection against things that say like your non-land permanents, like Cyclonic Rift specifically. So very cool Rocco list here. This is probably the Rocco list I've seen that I'm the most interested in. This one has the contradiction of playing Collector Oof and playing Emil combos, which, you know, you can combo with Collector Oof with the Temur Sabertooth, but not with Emil, because you can flicker Oof as many times as you want, but it doesn't get rid of it from the battlefield. But I like this version of Rocco. My only change would probably be to add the Arena Rector too. I just find it very interesting to be playing one of those combos and not the other one. But clearly a strong enough Rocco list to bring this pilot up to the top 16 of this tournament. We have a Yeva list. So we haven't seen Yeva in a little bit. It top forward an event a little while ago, but hasn't really been seen since then. Yeva is a really interesting deck in the fact that it is like mono green flash control, playing a bunch of different combos. The people who really like this deck play a lot of this deck and play it very well. Very interesting to see a prototype card here. I assume this has something to do with infinite mana with Gaia's Cradle stuff with Temur Sabertooth. It looks like Yeva, definitely interesting. One of the best cards to be paying off of Seaborn Muse. But Yeva is definitely one of those decks where really good pilots can take advantage of the fact that the lines are not easy to process, especially not easy to process when your opponent is holding all of their interaction and their creatures until the very last minute. But Yeva is a very strong list. It's able to basically take advantage of the fact that it can respond to whatever your opponents are doing as long as you have Yeva on the battlefield. And it's definitely one of those decks that if you ignore it at all, it will take the game. And that's kind of what you got to do, is basically put it in situations where you blow it out of card advantage and make the deck useless. And when you create that scenario, when you wipe its board and when you put in positions where Yeva can't be on the battlefield, the deck is significantly worse. But when it has its commander, when it's doing its thing, it's a very explosive deck and can often take advantage of the stack when people are trying to go off and, you know, go off in response to other players, which is really cool and definitely a solid position to be in. Definitely interested to see another top 16 performance from this list, and Yeva doing a great job in this. This is perhaps, and maybe I should have saved this later in the episode, the most interesting deck in this tournament. This is Liberator Urza's Battlethopter. This is a colorless cEDH deck. Definitely, as I said, the most interesting deck to come out of this tournament. It's called Dockside Fodder V2, which is very funny because being as many artifacts as this deck has 50 artifacts, not including the creatures. So, and your commander too. So definitely a deck that feeds Dockside. To note, there is a Torpor Orb in this list to try and, you know, mitigate just a tiny bit of the fact that this feeds Dockside a ton. But it's really like this weird but cool colorless control deck that plays a bunch of stacks pieces like God Pharaoh Statue and Trinisphere and Sphere of Resistance, Torpor Orb, Damping Sphere, all of these like stacksy control pieces, while also playing sort of this Voltron combat beatdown game plan and like value artifact game plan. There's also a bunch of different like infinite colorless mana stuff. You have your Kozileks and things like that here in the top end. But this is a really wild deck. Very interested to see a colorless list. I think this is the first ever performance I've seen from a colorless deck being able to take a top 16 performance in this format. It is a deck that I know for a fact I would underestimate if I saw it at the table. So it's super cool to see it have this performance here in this tournament. It's very, very sweet. The thing that like you have this flash enabler in the command zone, right? So being able to, once again, like we just talked about 2 seconds ago with Yeva, being able to flash in your combos, being able to flash in your stacks pieces to hit your opponents at the perfect time really can mess up what your opponents are doing. And clearly the ability to respond to your opponents in a 4-player game is paying off to not only one but multiple players in this tournament. Very, very cool stuff, and very interested to see this list. It's definitely, as I mentioned, the coolest list in this entire tournament. And all of these lists are going to be linked in the description down below. So super happy to see what a spicy deck to be played in this tournament. We have Temur Polytyrant. So this is the classic Rograk Thrasios deck trying to resolve a polymorph effect to get either Hullbreaker Horror or Tidespout Tyrant onto the battlefield. You have things like Luca, you have Polymorph, Reality Scramble, Transmogrify, and then you have some instant speed ones here with Chaos Mutation, Divergent Transformations. It's an archetype I really enjoy. I played a decent amount of it for a while. It was like one of my main decks for a little bit when the meta was getting really stacksy, and I was really enjoying breaking parity with stacks effects with this deck. It also can go off with, I believe most lists are playing Isochron Scepter now, but it actually seems like this version is not running Isochron Scepter, which I find pretty interesting, but it does have Underworld Breach as your backup win condition here. It's very strange to me because I know a lot of these Poly Scepter lists were playing Scepter, but definitely interested to see the fact that it's on all the wheels, all of these things, but not choosing to play Isochron Scepter as its backup win condition, which, as I said, has been pretty common up to this point, and choosing to go with the Underworld Breach plan, which is, as what I found with this archetype, is it's extremely explosive, like you're playing all these wheels anyways, but the only downside is the fact that you're really hard to like tutor the Underworld Breach combo. You basically only have Muddle the Mixture and the ability to wheel into it or dig into it with Thrasios. So very cool to see this list. It's an archetype I really, really enjoy. It's both, two of my favorite commanders in the format, Thrasios and Rograk. Obviously, two very strong commanders in the format, and really cool, unique strategy. We have Tivit Pivot cEDH. I'm a big fan of a good rhyme. This is another classic Tivit mid-range list. This list is going a bit bigger than some of the other Tivit lists I've noticed. This one's playing Karn in the 4-mana slot, which I really like against dockside decks. Using Luris to be basically a recursion engine for your time sieve. I know for me personally, I tend to use my Savines, but this list is also not playing more graveyard hate. It seems like, oh, they're on Grafdigger's Cage with Luris, which is pretty interesting. And playing a few, as I mentioned, spicier options here. Hullbreaker Horror, you're able to use Tivit as an outlet if you're able to generate infinite mana of every color. So Hullbreaker Horror here basically being a win condition in the deck. Myrel is a very interesting include, definitely not one that I expected, but it's just another Grand Abolisher effect here. As I mentioned, this list, once again, going a little bit bigger than these standard Tivit lists, but having a bit of payoff for it. Stinging Study, a very interesting card in this list. It's not your ad nauseum, right? But it is a 5-mana draw 6, lose 6 life, which, the argument might be for some people, why are you not just playing ad nauseum? I think the ability to like politic with your opponents and say you are not running ad nause is definitely a thing, but in Stinging Study is a little bit more of like just a draw 6, go into your next turn kind of thing. It's very interesting to see this choice here. I'm curious to hear how Stinging Study has paid off in the deck and why it's not just an ad nause, but it's definitely pretty cool to see that card in this list. Apart from that, just doing the classic Tivit things, trying to Notion Wheel your opponents, trying to win with Thassa's Oracle, Demonic Constellation, having the 3-mana Teferi Displacer Kitten combos, or trying to go off with your Time Sieve and take infinite turns with Tivit. We have Perplexing Kinnan by Tyler from Play to Win. Now, this was not actually Tyler from Play to Win's performance with this deck. The actual player is someone who I did not get their name, but this is the list they were playing. Tyler's exact 100 cards here, although this is saying 99, but I think that's due to Tyler making some shifts at the time I was opening this list up. But they basically played Tyler from Play to Win's list exactly, which is just a sort of big flips version of Kinnan, which is playing like big cards like Void Winnower, Tidespout Tyrant, Hullbreaker Horror, Coma, all of these giant hits, but also playing Perplexing Chimera, which is, as someone who just actually played against Tyler right before this is recording, it's an interesting card. It sort of locks up the game when Kinnan already has a bit of an advantage board state. I've been playing a good amount of Kinnan lately, and it's not an option that I tend to prefer, but there's a lot of benefits to this card, and the explanations for that I'll leave to Tyler from Play to Win, because they actually just released a deck tech where he talks about Perplexing Chimera like a good amount in that deck tech, so feel free to go check out their channel and check out that video in that. But apart from that, it is a classic Kinnan list trying to go off with the Basalt Monolith combos. This one's not running the Isochron Scepter loops, but trying to either flip into some big creatures or go off with Basalt Monolith combos and win the game. Spellslinging Wizard cEDH by Tapspace is a classic Inala combo list. Aether Channeler is a new one for this deck that I have not seen before. This one's also playing the lines with Ruthless Technomancer and Bloodline Necromancer, where you can actually win through a Rule of Law effects. I do not know the exact particularities on how to go through that line, but I know that there is a line in Anala where you can win with these two through a rule of law, which is obviously a huge boon to the deck. And Anala is just like a very strong combo deck. To be honest, I was kind of surprised it had been so long since I've seen a performance from Anala, seeing as in my tier list, I think I put it in the A or the S tier. I think it's like one of the best decks at just stealing wins from your opponents in the format. And there's nothing like super insane that I would say in this version of the deck. I'm definitely interested to see little cards here like Ghostly Flicker is not one I'm used to. Baleful Mastery, definitely not a card I'm used to. Surprised to see this one specifically, just Exile effect, I guess. Stifle is a pretty underplayed card in the format. Essence Flux, definitely another like not played often. And then Blue Elemental Blast, which is starting to pick up a lot of steam lately. Things hitting Winota, Dockside, Underworld Breach, all of these are like really important cards in the format that this card can hit. I'm Just a Silly Guy, Just a Silly Little Creature deck by Moose Truce. This is an Animar list, classic Animar stuff, trying to go off with Ancestral Statue, playing a lot of really good value things. The one thing I noticed about this Animar list specifically is it's playing a lot of cards that have like value cascade effects, like Ethereum Sorcerer and Maelstrom Wanderer. Definitely a lot of cards I've not come to expect from Animar, but just doing the Animar thing of wanting to get down Animar super early, right? You want to be able to play a bunch of value creatures, playing 56 creatures, which is more than Winota, which is the other highest in the format, right? This version's playing Collector Oof, which I find pretty interesting, but as I mentioned, the Collector Oof combos in the deck usually have some sort of way of bouncing your own creature, like Team or Sabretooth. This one's playing Void Winnower, which is really hot, in my opinion. Very cool to see. Definitely a lot more spicy top-end creatures than I expect in a Animar list, and definitely not as the ones I'm used to, for sure. This list is definitely playing a lot of more unique options, but really focusing on dockside combos, but interestingly having certain ways to, just like with the Emil thing we talked about earlier, not able to combo with like Deadeye Navigator and stuff like that. So really interesting deck. Very cool to see Animar do a performance, and definitely interesting to see Animar make a top performance with what I would consider a lot more unique cards than I'm used to seeing in Animar. So very cool, and congrats to this player. This is Tivit Treasures. It is another Tivit list. This one's very similar to the list that I took to Silicon Dynasty. Maybe not, yeah, just a few spicy cards different, like things like Dovin's Veto and Tails End different from the list that I played in that tournament, but, doing the same things that we just talked about with the other list with a few less top-end cards, playing the Teferi Displacer combos, the Thassa's Oracle combos, playing Urza to convert a lot of your clues into mana rocks, which is like one of the bigger problems with the deck if they start flooding you with clues. And it is just doing the same stuff that Tivit tries to do, which is play a bunch of value engines, grind out your opponents, and have a bunch of redundant layered win conditions. This is competitive The Truth. It is Zane's Turbo Nas list. You've heard me refer to decks like this. This is almost exactly the memo list that they were also playing, but it's the same thing where it's Najeela with a more turbo ad nauseum style slant. If you've seen any of my past videos, I've been talking about this deck a good amount because it keeps putting up these top 16 performances, having ways to go off like Derevi and Grim Hireling that combo with your commander. You have your Thassa's Oracle Demonic Consultation combos on top of your Najeela combos, and then you're also playing your Warrior's Oaths and your Final Fortunes and going for a more aggressive ad nauseum style game plan, trying to win with things like Underworld Breach. So it's Najeela with a Turbo Nas focus. Very efficient deck, very good at just taking games, and very good at just putting up consistent performances. So this deck continually putting up wins over and over again, and just once again being 5 of the best colors in the format, right? Just playing a lot of the best cards in because you get access to every color, and doing a lot of really strong stuff. We have Timna Likes Cats 2. This is a blue farm deck. The special thing about this blue farm deck is it is playing Teferi Displacer Kitten combos, which I know there's been a lot of debate about whether this is something you should be playing in blue farm. There were people like Killstars who had sort of focused on the Displacer Kitten version of this deck. As I've mentioned in some previous videos, I am a big fan of layering extra win cons into your archetypes, and if you're already playing a card like Teferi, basically as another Grand Abolisher effect, if you're already playing Displacer Kitten to like storm off with your other cards easier, I think it makes a ton of sense to be able to throw in an extra win condition in this deck that already has a decent amount of them, and being able to draw your entire deck with that combo, as well as like get a bunch of value off Displacer Kitten and get a bunch of value off of your another Grand Abolisher effect being in Teferi Time Raveler. I think it is a solid inclusion in this deck. You know, lately people have been debating on Peer into the Abyss, but it seems like this pilot went in with that choice here. Apart from that, nothing too insane, just a classic blue farm list with a few other cute cards that allow it to kind of be a little more spicy than some other blue farm lists in the area. This is the answer. It is very similar to the Truth, the one we just looked at. It is a turbo ad nauseum list that has Najeela at the pilot head of it. This is the first deck in our top 4 of this tournament. So we have 2 of these turbo ad naus Najeela lists making performances in this tournament, one of them being top 16, one of them being all the way in the top 4. This feels like a really safe deck to be winning games on right now in this tournament, in this format. It gets a lot of free interaction in SWAT and Guardianship and Deadly Rollick because Najeela is such an easy card to like drop down super early in the game. And then you have 5 colors, you have some of the best cards in the format, you have super easy 1-card win conditions in Hireling and Derevi. It just seems like a really, really solid deck right now in the format. It seems like a deck that is just going to continue putting up results and is probably like the front runner for like one of the best decks in the format right now. Between like that and Thrasios Bruce Piles and Blue Farm, I think there is like 3 decks that are like really starting to push ahead and like consistently win. And these decks are doing that over and over again. There's arguments for things like Winota, but that's actually been on a bit of a downturn lately. But this, Turbo Najeela list is like consistently putting up results week after week, and it's definitely starting to show. Here we have Fishbowl. This is a Timnacrom deck with no Displacer Kitten combos. This one's, interestingly, as I mentioned, people are starting to play Teferi just individually as Teferi. So this card is just seeing play in this list as another Grand Abolisher. This is a just pretty standard blue farm list. Apart from that, playing Orum's Chant, which I know some lists were talking about a little while ago. Apart from that, nothing too crazy, just all the classic blue farm stuff, and the deck just doing its thing, casting its ad nauseum, going for Thoracle or Underworld Breach and winning the game. Our last deck before our winner in the top 4 is a Magda list, which I had literally just gone on record like a week ago just saying that, clearly the Magda performance a year ago was a dud because there have not been any other Magda performances up until this point, and here I go being immediately proven wrong with a top 4 performance by a Magda player. Very surprising to me because I thought, Magda, now that people like got what the deck did, would not put up another result for a while, but clearly this one is doing a good job. So Magda is trying to do the thing where you get a bunch of dwarves, they accrue a bunch of treasures, and then with a tutor or 2 from your Magda, either A, you're playing this sort of mid-range game plan, or B, you're going for your combo, which involves you getting your Clock of Omens and being able to either have an artifact dwarf, or this version is also playing Grinding Station and Battered Golem, which also act as, instead of needing an artifact dwarf, they untap for your Clock of Omens combo. I thought it was very interesting that these were included when I haven't seen those included in a lot of Magda lists that I have seen in the past. But basically, you generate infinite treasures with the combos that I just mentioned, and you are able to pull infinite amounts of either artifacts or dragons out of your deck, and you're able to win through combos like that. Chisgoria is a new include. It's a dragon, on top of the fact that it gets you a bunch of card advantage. It allows you to cast your artifacts. It itself has affinity for artifacts, so it's sort of a top end finisher. That's a new inclusion, as well as the combos I had just mentioned with that. So nothing too insane, but definitely a few pieces here and there from the new sets, and Magda able to make a top 4 run into this tournament with just a few new additions and making me immediately eat my words saying that this deck was dead. So very cool stuff. Happy to see a very spicy mono red list make a top 4 run. This is a deck called Bees. For some reason, the deck list was submitted with the commanders not in the command zone, but for some reason it's part of the deck. But this is a Timnacrom blue farm deck. Nothing really spicy about this list right now. It's just a Timnacrom blue farm deck trying to do the Underworld Breach thing, resolve an ad nauseum, do Thassa's Oracle combos, or resolve Appear into the Abyss to do the same thing. Obviously, we have the intuition lines that I didn't mention in the previous version of this deck, but this definitely tournament had a few deep runs from blue farm. Definitely 2 top 4s and 1 in the top 16, which obviously a very very impressive run from this archetype. As I mentioned within the Gila list, right? If you're looking out for decks to keep looking out for, we have a bunch of Thrasios Bruce performances lately, a bunch of Najeela performances, and Blue Farm doing very well in this tournament. Nothing too crazy to mention with this archetype, just a deep run by Blue Farm, and congratulations to Big Butt So What, which is, can't believe that's a name I just had to say for this tournament, but congratulations to that pilot, and congrats for taking down the Fishbowl. And looking forward to hearing more about these tournaments. It sounds like it was so successful that they will be doing another one. Congrats to Playing with Power for sponsoring a local tournament that got once again 76 people, which is pretty big for a smaller tournament. For a tournament that isn't, you know, held by one of like the main companies that has been running tournaments as of late. So congrats to them. If you like videos like this, make sure to hit like and subscribe. It helps out the channel a ton. Thank you all for watching this video today. If you are interested in supporting the channel in a very cohesive way, in a very supportive way, make sure to go over patreon.com/comedianmtg. You can get benefits like our coaching tier, which is currently locked at the moment, but there will be slots maybe opening up for that, especially as I move later in this year. I'm able to open more slots. But if you would like to get coaching outside of that tier, I do offer independent coaching. So feel free to hit me up either on my email at comedianmtg@gmail.com, my Twitter at comedianmtg, or hit me up at my Discord. And all of those will have links down in the description below. Thank you all so much for joining me for this video. Before I go, I'd like to shout out two groups: Dragonshield, who is an affiliate of this channel, whose link you can go down below and buy some Dragonshield product. It is the sleeves that I use for all of my products, and the link down below will get you an affiliate code for that, which will help out the channel a ton anytime you buy sleeves. If you're going to buy sleeves anyways, it helps to do it and support the channel at the same time. And in addition to that, we are affiliates of the Monarch Media Group. They are going to be talking about some new tournaments lately, and I'm really, really excited to be affiliated with that group and be an ambassador for Monarch Media. And I'm so excited that they're going to be starting up tournaments again soon after taking a bit of a hiatus to go over some restructuring. So really excited, and keep an eye out for those. Without any further ado, hope you all have an amazing week, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.
I can feel the blood creeping up from the heathens. Got will, got fight, got pride, got reason. If they wanna go eat, then you know I'm gon' feed them. If you're coming for me, hope you're ready for a demon. I got eyes in the back of my head, I'm seeing. Take me for granted and you know I'm leaving. I'ma take what's mine with the webs I'm weaving. I could take this crowd from seeing to believing.